People warm up in 4. Anyway, thank you all for being here this morning. And as I was sitting in meditation, I was thinking, I want to thank you all for sitting in meditation with us. It's some of us put up with it sometimes, this being there, but it's a gift to others to be quiet for a while and be in silence and sort of share the space. Buddhism, if you think about it, there's room for everybody in Buddhism, And when I say that, if your particular personality or mental approach is that you're a logical, practical person, you can find a home in Buddhism being that sort of a practitioner. And if you're a person who tends to be attracted to the mystical, living in this mystery of what we call life on earth, you can also find a home in Buddhism. And today we're going to talk about the mystical, okay? Now, Amitabha Buddha and Avalokiteshvara are inextricably linked. So who is Amitabha Buddha? That, in Buddhist cosmology, is, or he, the Buddha of infinite light and life, sort of like the source from which everything emanates. Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of great compassion, the one that we chanted about in the Heart Sutra. Right? Now, another way of translating Avalokiteshvara is the hearer, the hearer of the cries of the world. Like he or she who hears the cries of the world, of all who are suffering. I want to share kind of my intimate experience with the idea of Avalokiteshvara. In 2015, the week before I was actually ordained as a Buddhist reverend, I went on the trip of my life. I consider it that. I traveled to Korea with Hedosunim, his former wife, and his son, and Bapan Sunim, a reverend in our order who has passed on. We visited 3 temples. One was like a large temple in the Jogye order of Korean Buddhism called Waumsa. It was just an amazing space, just large building after building after building, grounds after grounds, gates after gates that you pass through, each one having its own meaning, And Senomsa, which is the primary temple for home temple for the Taig order, the order that we belong to. And it's, in a way, a more like a country temple in a way. Waumsa has a lot of paved areas, a lot of, nicely kept stone and steps and concrete and all that. So Namsa is like a little bit of like dirt paths and whatnot and rocks, and sometimes maybe the paint isn't quite up, as pristine, but it's beautiful in its own rustic way, kind of. And then we went to another temple, and here we really stayed the longest. It was in a smaller temple called Songjoam, and it's really Am means, like, if you think of Sa at the end of a temple, that means temple. So Namsa, Waumsa, Songjoam, Am meaning hermitage. This is a hermitage in the middle of Seoul. I don't know if that's really a possibility, but there it was, okay? So as impressive and awe-inspiring as these other temples were, Songjoam really kind of stuck with me and has been the most memorable. So after we had finished staying in these, at Wamsa, we traveled to Seoul via train, and had made arrangements to be picked up by one of the monks at Songjuam at some location. So he came up and met us. We all know each other. He's got gray on, we got gray on. We're the only Americans around. Hey, that must be the guys. So I don't remember even this monk's name now, but he was a cool guy. We loaded up into the minivan that he was driving and drove down the drive isn't really a drive or drove, that's not the way to, I think. We zoomed, like kind of careened along the roads of Seoul. He was weaving like skillfully in and out of traffic, It reminded me of a friend of mine that was, when I was in Boston driving, and I thought, there's like this little two cars converging, and he's like, I can make it between those. And that's what he would do, So we're driving along these roads, and then he turns, and there come up on this, in my mind's eye, I'm remembering it as this lot, like a parking lot. I don't know what it was, just a big open space. He drove into that, he drove across, not quite as fast as he was before, but came around this one building and found this little opening, sort of a gate, I guess, but it was like this fence, and there was this opening in it, and he zoomed through it, and we're driving along this building on one side, a fence on our left, and and beyond that fence, a thoroughfare with traffic and the people walking along the sidewalk, as I recall. And then, as we drove, we finally came upon a paved path, and in what looked like we were sort of like in this public park, if you will. And there was all kinds of people walking with their hiking sticks and backpacks and hiking gear on up this path. It was going uphill. And they made way for us, and we drove a little slower, respecting human life. And as we drove along this path, we came upon a little road, and he made his sharp right, and we started going up that road. And I mean up. I swear this van was at 45 degrees for a good part of it. And we're like driving up this thing, and it's winding, and he's just cruising up this road. And finally we get up to the top. But my thought was, what happens in winter? How does this work? Because it does get cold there, and it does freeze. But anyway, we finally got up into the plateau where the temple was, and it was a beautiful space. It was smaller. It had, a singular Dharma hall, as I recall, and some sleeping quarters on one side, kitchen area, and another temple. Temple that was devoted. So the Dharma hall, that's where the primary practices and services were performed. And even behind that Dharma hall was another altar, paying homage, paying respect to the god of the mountain. And that's sort of a tradition in Korea. Wherever it's built, you respect the space on which it was built. And to the right, like I said, was the kitchen, and then a separate temple, if you will, which is the Jijang Bosal temple. And that's where people would come and pay their respects to those who have passed on. Sort of like what we have up here, okay? A bit more elaborate, but there it was. And it was just inspiring, and just a beautiful space, white statues, all and row after row of little white Jijang Bosal statues, and before them you could put a candle and a card, and pay your respects there like that. And just outside of our sleeping quarters, sort of to the left and in between the Dharma hall and the sleeping quarters, was a very, very, very large statue of Kwanseum Bosal. And I'm going to mix words up. You know, Avalokiteshvara, Sanskrit for this bodhisattva, the hero, she or who hears all the cries of the world. Kwanseum Bosal in Korean is equivalent to Kuan Yin, if you've heard of that term in Chinese. Kanon in Japanese. All the same thing, all intermingled. But it was a very large statue. I can't even, estimate. at least 2 of me tall on top of a pedestal, platform, if you will. To get up to that area, you had to walk up a few steps, and there was this large marble veranda that was there. And on this thing, there was this mat, this blue yoga mat, as I remember. I thought, well, that must be for those of us who like to do prostrations. So I don't even remember, teacher, if I did it every day or not. But anyway, I did prostrations.
You were very faithful about it.
I was, okay. And so 108 prostrations, not shouting it out, but speaking it, the 4 shout-outs as we go along. Great is at prostration 25, great is the problem of birth and death. At the next 25, impermanence surrounds us. The next one, which I always forget, be awake each moment, yes. That's funny, isn't it?
How ironic.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had a fender bender years ago, and it was coming from or to a service here on New Year's Eve, I think it was. And I was wearing and I caused it, I rear-ended somebody. And I was wearing a shirt underneath my grays that said, "Wake up." So, and the last one, do not waste your life. That's the last shout out. So that's what I did for the time that we were there. And I was looking up at this statue and studying it, and I took a picture of it and preserved it for my memory. And it's a beautiful thing. Kwanseum Bosal is standing there with a vase in one hand, the other hand more or less cupped in front, and her face. This is a sort of the androgynous representation of Kwanseum Bosal. On her head, and on top of her head, 10 other heads. And I thought, what is it? And I thought, for a Westerner used to what we're used to, this is stretching it. And then right in the middle of Kwanseum Bosal's forehead is a little smaller image of a Buddha sitting in meditation. And I wanted to study this, and I thought, where does this iconography come, or what does this kind of stuff come from? So there's a story to it, and this is how this particular story goes. So before recorded history, way back, imagine this this folk tale, if you will, this tale. Amitabha Buddha was in his pure land, where of bliss and peace, and Avalokiteshvara was born. Avalokiteshvara was born from a beam of light that came from Amitabha's right eye, and came fully formed at that point. And Avalokiteshvara was tasked with hearing the cries of the world and bringing an end to people's suffering, the suffering of all beings, if you will. And what Amitabha's practice was to tap into Amitabha, or Avalokiteshvara's power was to tap into the infinite well of compassion that was Amitabha. So as he or she looked down on the world, she saw all these suffering beings in samsara. And using that power and that will, actually gathered them and was in the process of taking them to the Pure Land where Amitabha resides, and where all these beings could live in bliss and peace, and be taught the Dharma in a deep manner so that they could attain complete and full enlightenment and rest there forever. So as Avalokiteshvara is doing this, bringing these beings up to the Pure Land, he looks back at the world, samsara, and notices already all the spaces that were just seconds ago emptied of suffering, emptied of suffering beings, were once again filling up with beings that were suffering. And this just crushed Avalokiteshvara. I mean, the compassion was so deep that, I've done what I was supposed to do, bringing everybody to the Pure Land to end their suffering. And yet, it's starting all over again. And Avalokiteshvara's suffering was so great that his head just split, just cracked right open. And Amitabha witnessed this and saw that this was just how much Avalokiteshvara wanted to attain her mission. His mission was to experience so much grief that not fulfilling the mission, her head basically split into pieces. Amitabha brought all those pieces and formed 10 other heads. And those were what we see on these different statues. It's not on every statue that you see of Kwanseum Bosal or Kuan Yin, but it is on the one that I was seeing. And so what does that mean? 10 different, maybe be able to look and see in all 10 directions. One where I was reading it, they said, for some statues you'll see on one side 3 heads that are looking serenely at the world, and they're expressing that compassion that brings people to enlightenment, that helps bring people to enlightenment. On another side you'll see statues that are looking sternly, like kind of scowling at people, like get on with it, get to work, don't just sit there, And then on another side would be faces that are looking down, and they have fangs, and their role is to protect these people, these beings that Avalokiteshvara is saving from suffering. And so Avalokiteshvara has these heads and is looking out and is able to see all these beings again, and is empowered to continue, not to lose resolve, and reaches out to help. And at that moment, Amitabha says, you're going to need more than just these 2 arms. And so if you've seen some statues that have 1,000 arms, that's where these 1,000 arms, he suddenly just made 1,000 arms for the Avalokiteshvara to be able to reach out and save other beings. Some statues you'll see there's implements, like little tools in each hand. Those are all designed to help in the process of awakening the beings. Other statues, you'll see a little eye, so that all the better to see you with, for, if you will. So that's how those images come about. On most every statue that you see, you're going to see that little Buddha up here. That's Amitabha Buddha. That source that Kwanseum Bosal gets his or her power from. So as you see in Buddhism, like it or not, the idea of a higher power is not foreign. It's something that is accepted by a lot of Buddhists. Not accepted by all Buddhists. There's those more practical practitioners, and there's sects of Buddhism, and they might even say that's a bunch of hogwash, But that's not the idea, So is this concept or these statues even, is this idea of Kwanseum Bosal, is it real? How do most of us define what is real? If you ask the typical American Westerner, what is hard and fast and palpable, that which we can touch, that's real stuff. If you can hear it, taste it, feel it, smell it, touch it, that's real. But that's outside, right? And if you've been around Buddhism long enough, and I really challenge and say if you've been around just about any faith long enough, you know that there's an inner world too that needs developing and empowering too. So it's all mind, this inner mind, these that we live with, contains and maintains all of what we're seeing, feeling, touching, hearing, smelling, tasting. Okay, all of that. How do you know? Because without mind, where is there any experience of any of all this? It follows you everywhere. Okay? So this mind in which our smaller minds are contained, is this higher power that we can tap into. And then there's this idea of compassion that Amitabha Buddha represents. And it is said, without developing that great compassion for others, an awakening enlightenment isn't going to happen. So I've kind of told a fanciful tale, right? It's like, and if I were you, and I was you at some point, earlier in my practice, I just can't grasp this. I can't put my arms around this thing. But that really challenges, how we practice. Our practice isn't meant to confine and restrict, how we think or feel in this way or that way, right? It's not this or that, not this or that. Buddhist practice is meant to kind of free your mind to become something that accepts and includes. Right? So, just as real as an elephant or a mountain is, this concept and idea of bodhisattva of great compassion is equally real. Just consider that, whether it's something that you say, yes, I know that in my bones, or you might say, well, I don't quite get it yet, but just consider that that's a possible reality, right? One thing that came to me recently, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and so on through all the 5 skandhas. And reality is what we come to through the five skandhas. That's how you experience what is real for you. So reality is emptiness. Emptiness is reality. You know, it's all something that you're not ever going to be able to grab and hold. I think of it sometimes like, like the greased pig contests. You know, people trying to wrestle the greased pig and it just squirts out from the arms. Sometimes I think that's what the Dharma is for me. I think I got it, and it's like out there. And our job is to be okay with that, not being able to grasp. Okay? So thank you.